It is Friday, and it's another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. We got some questions to answer for a Mailbag Friday. I want to go over these late game situations and how the Royals can make them more entertaining. And I've got a quick report card on Royals pitching coach Brian Sweeney. All of that is coming up next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
First things first, we want to thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen every day. And you can always find us on those podcasting platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. You also can find us on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you don't want to go through those apps and you just want a link to find and click on, well, you can follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And that link will lead you right to this podcast episode. If this is your first time listening, allow me to introduce myself as Jack Johnson. I've been a Royals fan my entire life, and I turned that fandom into the workplace. I now work in sports radio. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB here in Kansas City, have a nighttime radio show once a week, and some morning radio shows on 1510 AM ESPN Kansas City. Don't just talk Royals, so if you want to get my takes on the Chiefs, things in the NFL, NBA, college sports, you can always check me out there. But for just Royals stuff, you can come right to this podcast on Locked On Podcast Network. I've been doing this now for about the last month and a half. Had a great time doing it. Even if the team isn't entertaining you, my goal is to make it entertaining when you listen to these podcast episodes. Today's show is brought to you by Sleeper. I'm going to have some very good picks to give you coming up here in about 10 to 12 minutes. I will base it around this game one of Seattle and Kansas City up at Safeco Field. It'll be Brady Singer on the bump tonight. He'll probably be in one of my picks for Sleeper. To kick off the show today, and as we do every single Friday, we're going to have a Mailbag Friday. Some of you have sent me questions. Not as heavy as it was last week. Never a problem, though, because we can extend it into one or two segments. Today, it'll just be one segment, of course, because we got about 6 or 7 questions to go into, and I want to get as detailed as I possibly can for you, the listeners and the followers out there that took time out of your day to ask some of these questions. So let's get right into it. This is from Jay on Twitter. Who from the crappy Royals days do you wish could play now? For me, it'll always be my boy Johnny Damon. Shout out from a former 816 dog now living down in New Mexico. There's a lot of different guys I would go with here. And I think the biggest question is, can I use Zach Greinke from 2009? Can I use a Cy Young winner? Because this pitching staff certainly needs a Cy Young winner. I think every staff would. But if Zach Greinke's already on this team, maybe I can hold off and not pick Greinke from 2009. Can't go wrong with Mike Sweeney. I mean, Mike Sweeney was always on bad Royals teams, but man, did he produce. I don't know where he would technically fit into this roster. Yeah, you could put him at first base because of the injuries right now. Maybe that's a dumb thing to say for a team that's well over 40 games under 500, that you can't find a spot for him to play. He would play, and he'd be next to Bobby Witt Jr., the best hitter on this team. Mike Sweeney's not a bad pick. Jermaine Dye would be another one of my picks. If I was going for a late game situation guy, which we're going to talk about here in about 10 to 15 minutes, Joaquin Soria, all-star Joaquin Soria, some of those great years where he had a sub-1.9 ERA, multiple saves. I mean, he had his own intro song, Welcome to the Jungle by Guns N' Roses. That would certainly be fun to have again. Can I count? This is a good one. Oh, man. Alex Gordon, early Alex Gordon. 2011 Alex Gordon, I think, would be one of my picks for a corner outfield spot. Maybe I should base it around pitching. That wouldn't be a bad thing here. Kevin Appier, he'd be one of my guys to place in there. But if you're just meaning, post-2000 Royals teams, I think I'm going to lock it in here with – I'll go Mike Sweeney. I'll go Mike Sweeney to plug into that middle of the lineup. They need a big-time middle of the bat lineup. Jermaine Dye would be probably the runner-up for me. Joaquin Soria probably third. So that's a great question there on Twitter from Jay. Marty asked, The 5 guys that I listed to add to the 40-man roster on yesterday's episode, who am I subtracting? I think the biggest part of this is, who am I not subtracting? There's a lot of guys, I think, on the 40-man roster I would be okay parting with. Now, let's go with the obvious ones. Zach Greinke's not going to be on the 40-man roster because I'd imagine the Royals will let him walk next season. Taylor Clark feels like a good fit to not be added on the 40-man roster. Dylan Coleman, another guy you could remove off the 40-man roster if you can't fix him. Taylor Hearn's another guy. There's 3. Tucker Davidson, he's just kind of a flyer guy. So if that really comes down to it, I'm all right parting ways with him. Jonathan Heasley, he doesn't really have it at the big league level. He's somebody I'd be willing to move on from. Brad Keller, Brad Keller's not coming back in a Royals uniform, so you might as well clear up one of those spots. If you're out on Jackson Kowar, we talked about him in yesterday's podcast episode. He's another guy you can move off that spot. James MacArthur holds a 40-man roster spot. You could move him. Colin Snyder holds a 40-man roster spot. Josh Staumont does. Josh Taylor. There's 8 or 9 guys. So I think the biggest thing here is not who am I taking off. It's who am I leaving on the 40-man roster. So I'm not really concerned about the Royals having a tough spot in not being able to add somebody to the 40-man roster, because there's 9 or 10 guys that you could easily remove and not blink an eye from that 40-man roster. Alex on Twitter asked, should the Royals go outside the box and consider trading Maikel Garcia this offseason? I was asked this a couple days ago. It's a very good question, because does Maikel Garcia fit in your competitive window? I'd like to say he is right now on that next competitive Royals team. He's so good over at third base, and you can't take great defensive third basemen lightly. The Royals have had just abysmal defensive third basemen over the course of their history. I mean, go back to 2000, just go back 20, 25 years. There's not been very good defensive third baseman. Mike Moustakas, he's my favorite Royal of all time. I wouldn't put him in a great defensive third baseman category. Maikel Garcia is probably one of the best defensive third basemen you have. And at the plate, he's doing just enough. I have no complaints with him at the leadoff spot. But if the Royals were to trade him, I'm assuming you're looking for some pitching. I don't know, though. I don't think I would be willing to move on from him, because there's nobody banging on the door to take the third base spot. I mean, you traded Hunter, or not traded, excuse me. You let Hunter Dozier go. So the only third baseman on the roster was Matt Duffy, really, and he's a second baseman by trade. Maikel Garcia was a shortstop. If Caden Wallace was more ready, a second-round pick last year out of Arkansas, I think I'd be willing to do that if the price was right. But I'm not sure he's getting the haul just yet. Now, ask me this question again at the end of next year, basically 365 days from now, and kind of get my temperature on that. But to me, it feels like Maikel Garcia is going to be a pretty safe pick to be on the roster next year. It feels like a lock, and I don't think the Royals are really going to entertain or seriously entertain any trade possibilities with him. Matt asked on Twitter, how big of a risk do the Royals need to take in free agency, and why does it need to be Kona Takahashi? This comes alongside long-term extensions with Bobby Witt Jr. and Vinny, of course, and maybe Cole Reagans if you want to get spicy. I love all those extension candidates. I would love to see the Royals extend at least 2 of those 3, and Bobby Witt Jr., Vinny, and Cole Reagans. I'd throw Maikel Garcia in that conversation. I wouldn't say the Royals need to be overly aggressive and risky. I don't think they need to hand out any 4 or 5-year deals. I would love to see them entertain the international market. I mean, I've never understood why the Royals aren't aggressive in going after, players in the Nippon League over in Japan and Korea. I think there's great talent over there. The Royals have never been aggressive there. And I think there is tremendous talent that not only is good, but affordable for this Royals bunch. I would like to see them be aggressive, though. Good friend Preston Farr, follow him on Twitter at Royals Miners. He doesn't think the Royals are going to make a big splash. I could see this being an offseason like the Royals had in 2012. I tweeted that out yesterday. You can follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. Where they went and traded for James Shields and Wade Davis and signed Irvin Santana. There's 2 workhorses in your rotation. I don't think they've got somebody in their system to trade for a workhorse, a 200 innings guy like James Shields, but there's somebody out there they could go out there and get through free agency to be the number 1, and then find your Irvin Santana at number 2. So I'm not going to say they need to be aggressive or risky, but they need to be pretty active. If you want to get the fan base's support back, it's either going to be an extension to Bobby Witt Jr. or a little bit more action in the free agent market. Okay, the next question I got here is from Jackson. If you were trading for a young pitcher with club control, which prospects in the Royals system would you part ways with? I think right now in the Royals farm system, I am willing to part ways with just about any guy. I mean, when you are a bottom 5 system and somebody's going to be offering you a guy that can pitch and pitch well at the big league level, you got to be willing to listen. I think Frank Mozzicato might be my untouchable guy just because he's so young. I don't really want to move on from any 19 or 20-year-old prospects you have, but if for the right price, I would. The top 10 spots, like a Nick Lofton, a Tyler Gentry. You look at somebody like a Carson Rockefeller. I don't want to move on just yet from any of the guys you just drafted. Blake Mitchell type, a Rockefeller to Hunter Owen, a Spencer Nivens, a Jared Dickey. I mean, I like the way that at least some of those guys have been playing so far. Javier Vaz is another one. I want to be the future center fielder in Kansas City. So, yes, I think it had to be a big-time price. But I also go back to 2021, it was, when the Royals parted ways with Khalil Lee to go get Andrew Benintendi. Now, at the time, I did not want to part ways with Khalil Lee. But one quote that has always stuck with me from Rex Hudler said about the Andrew Benintendi deal, you will always trade a boy for a man. If you're trying to compete and win at the big league level, you got to be willing to part ways with prospects to go get you a big-time big leaguer. So if the Royals were to get an offer for an Andrew Benintendi-like player, I think it'd be willing to listen to. That's a great question there from Jackson. The last question I did get here on a Mailbag Friday, and always appreciate all the questions you guys give me. This is from Jake on Twitter. Nelly Velasquez, thoughts on him? I like what I've seen in small sample size, but doesn't appear the staff wants to plug him into the lineup, but every third game. The big thing for him is the swing and miss. You can see the power. He's got 4 or 5 home runs so far in a Royals uniform. Defensively, he's a bit of a liability. If you want me to give a great label for him, he is Edward Olivares with more pop. Can't really put him in the outfield. Got to be a DH type. He's got tremendous power, a lot of raw power, but it's an uphill battle, I think, for him to be a long-term fit here. He's a good bench bat, but unless he improves that walk rate, you can't just be a big-time swing and miss guy and a big-time home run guy. I think the best home run, strikeout, walk guy in the league is Kyle Schwarber. And Kyle Schwarber strikes out all the time, walks all the time, homers. Those are the 3 outcomes. If Nelly Velasquez can become some form of that, he is a future fit. But if it's just home run and strikeout, eventually guys are going to know how to pitch to you pretty well, and those home runs are going to dwindle a little bit. So great question there from Jake, and appreciate all the questions today on this edition of a Mailbag Friday. Okay, we're going to take this first break. When we come back, I want to go over late game situations and how the Royals can make their bullpen just a little bit more interesting, especially going into this series against the red-hot Seattle Mariners. That's coming up next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can always follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we get into these late game situations and how to handle the bullpen for the Kansas City Royals, let's give a shout out to today's title sponsor in Sleeper. I have some fun picks for you, especially for this game tonight in Seattle. Brady Singer on the bump for your Kansas City Royals. And let's start with him. He's going to be my pick tonight to have over 5.5 strikeouts against this Mariners lineup. Now, this Mariners lineup is rolling at the moment. Not sure you're going to be able to get Julio Rodriguez out many times tonight. You know how well Ty France hits the Royals. He hits them really well at Kauffman Stadium. Cal Raleigh's another name to watch for. It's just a tough lineup to go through, but I feel like Brady Singer, if he can get that slider working tonight, use that changeup sparingly, he can get around 6 or 7 strikeouts. So he's my first pick tonight. And then I am going to take Bobby Witt Jr. to have at least 1 hit and 1 stolen base tonight against the Mariners. He's going to get a lot of at-bats up there at the top of the lineup. He's been red hot as well alongside Julio Rodriguez. So a pretty safe pick for me tonight, going with Bobby Witt Jr. in this Royals lineup. So do you agree with my picks for Brady Singer and Bobby Witt Jr.? Well, I sure do. In Sleeper, you can swing with the fences, or swing for the fences, up to 100 times the payouts. All you have to do is choose 2 or more players that you like and select more or less on their stat categories like home runs, strikeouts, hits, and more. Get your picks right, and you could win big with Sleeper. I think right now the Royals are in one of these spots with their bullpen where it's just trying to find guys who can get outs. It's so fatigued. That bullpen doesn't have a truly reliable arm out there. I mean, Carlos Hernandez was until he hit this rough patch in the second half. John McMillan seems to have the hot hand, but he's only thrown 3 innings. I never should criticize, I think, too much for a manager's sake when there's not a lot of quote-unquote dudes in the bullpen. There's not a lot of shutdown guys. So I've never looked at Matt Quatraro and said, why are you going with this guy in this spot? Because my simple question or my simple rebuttal is, who else would you go with? When they throw Austin Cox out there in the 9th and Carlos Hernandez through the 8th, who else do you want out there? Now with John McMillan, it feels a little bit more spicy. I like it a little bit more. Still want to see Will Klein at the big league level. Want to see Steven Cruz. Want to see Joe Barlow. Look, I've seen the numbers. I know they're not great, but there's better options than what you got out there in the bullpen right now. They made a roster move earlier today, bringing Colin Snyder back up and putting Taylor Clark on a family emergency list. He has a family emergency, so hopefully all things are well in the Clark family, but he will not be available in the bullpen, probably for this series, is my guess, against Seattle. And Jake Brentz was returned from his rehab assignment. So a couple new names in that Royals bullpen, or I guess I should just say old names, familiar names in the Royals bullpen. But I still would like to see some of those hard throwers, those flamethrowers down in AAA Omaha, get a chance in Kansas City before the end of the season. So you may be asking yourself, well, Jack, what are you meaning about these late game situations, how they can get more entertaining, how they can get a little bit more fun for Royals fans out there? I know that even if you're 41-88, you can never go to a manager and just say, hey, start having some fun. No, just manage willy-nilly. Try this out, because they are trying to win every single game. There's been very few times in sports history where an owner or GM has gone up to a coach and said, or a manager, and said, we need you to lose. Actively try to lose, actively try to tank. And you could argue that the Royals look like from time to time they're trying to tank. They're not. They just don't have a lot of experience in that lineup. They have a bad rotation. They have a bad bullpen. But here's where I think you can make it more interesting and also beneficial for the 2024 season. So you're going into Seattle tonight, a scorching hot Mariners team. That place is going to be packed, rocking, and loud. It's going to be deafening in Seattle all 3 games of this series. Kind of in the way that it was in Philadelphia at Citizens Bank Park. The Royals, I thought, competed really well in that series. But again, just completely outmatched, outgunned by a much better team. For this Mariners series, though, if the Royals are competitive in those final 3 innings, I'm not giving the 8th inning. Now, maybe it helps with Taylor Clark not being there because he kind of slid into Dylan Coleman's role. But I'm not trying to use Carlos Hernandez for an inning and 2/3. Save him for the 9th. If you want to use him in the 9th, okay. He's your closer. He's not going to be your fireman. I'm not asking him to put out fires in the 6th and 7th inning. I want to see these young guys get a chance. If that means bringing John McMillan on in the 1-run game in the 8th with the crowd super into it and loud and rocking, so be it. These guys have to be out in spots like that. Rookies have to be out there. Guys with not a lot of experience, they got to be put in these situations. It's kind of like tossing somebody into the fire. Eventually, they have to sink or swim. And that's kind of been my message for the Royals bullpen this year. When you're having a revolving door and it's so fatigued, see who can do it and see who can't. If that means putting Austin Cox in there for the 9th to close out a game, and it may cost you a W, okay. But it's better than throwing a guy out there who may already blow the save on his own, but is not going to be in your bullpen in 2024. Now, these are guys that are fighting for a spot. I want to see Carlos Hernandez. I want to see Austin Cox. I want to see John McMillan. Tucker Davidson deserves a chance. I don't want to see Taylor Hearn out there. Taylor Hearn's not going to be a part of this 2024 bullpen. I don't want to see Colin Snyder out there. He's not going to be a part of this 2024 bullpen. You know what? This feels like the perfect series to do so. The odds are stacked against you. I mean, this is a buzzsaw series. You just saw this Seattle team. They've got their aces coming right at you. At least you don't see George Kirby again, who just threw the other day. But you'll see Logan Gilbert again, who you saw in Kansas City. You will see Luis Castillo. It's going to be a buzzsaw. That crowd's going to be loud. Put the rookies in chances to go out there and perform. Know that this Sunday series, it's probably going to be Zach Greinke's turn. If it's not Zach Greinke's turn, it's going to be Alec Marsh's turn. You want to use the opener again? Throw Tucker Davidson back out there. Give some of the young guys a chance. And that's more so the start of the game. I know the point of this segment is late game situations. My big message here is it's sink or swim time. This is how you evaluate an evaluation year. It's not about putting guys out there to just get you outs and, oh, he's the best guy for this spot. You know, I'm a very analytical person, and I believe in, hey, that's the best matchup. If Colin Snyder has good numbers, against Ty France and Teoscar Hernandez, and they're coming up, 1-2 in the lineup in the 8th inning. I get it, right? I get it's an analytical approach. But would I rather see Colin Snyder go out there or John McMillan in a clean inning? I'd say John McMillan, because John McMillan has a future in this bullpen. I got to see if he can do it in a series like this. I got to see if he can perform well when the lights are bright, when the crowd's loud, and it's a sold-out stadium. That's how I think you make these late-game situations more entertaining and better for the future of this team. It's all about a confidence thing. I've been asked this before, and it's a great question, but I'm also completely on the flip side of it, what you expect me to answer with it. When you have rookie pitchers or rookie hitters, it's always like, well, confidence is the big thing here. Why don't we wait till they face the White Sox at home in front of 12,000 people to give them the 8th inning? It's not a big-time pressure situation. And if they get it done, they've got confidence. Can you imagine the confidence that comes from sitting down 3 straight guys in the 8th inning of a sold-out environment? That's confidence. Okay, I can't be too impressed. As much as I love John McMillan, I can't hang on to his outing in Oakland where he struck out 2 and went 1-2-3. It was a dominant and powerful outing, but it's Oakland, okay, in front of 15 people. And this is Seattle in front of a lot of people for a team that's fighting for a playoff spot. Play spoiler. I'm going to be very intrigued tonight if the Royals carry some sort of lead into the 7th, 8th, and 9th inning and who gets the ball. Don't use Carlos Hernandez as your get-out-of-jail-free card. We all know he's the best guy in the bullpen, but save him for the 9th. Continue to increase that trade value. Don't run him into the ground. Don't use him like Scott Barlow was used. Bridge that gap. If you blow the game, okay, that's loss number 89 on the season. Is it any different than 88? Is it any different than 90? No, not one bit. This is what I want to see from this bullpen. Give the innings to the guys that have a future in this bullpen. If they even do. If they don't, move on. That's how you evaluate in an evaluation year. The last thing I want to go over here is Brian Sweeney, the pitching coach of the Royals, and what grades I would give him as we inch closer and closer to September and the end of the year. That's coming up next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can always follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. To wrap up the show today, I've given out report cards before. I believe it's been JJ Piccolo, it's been John Sherman, and Matt Quatrero. I might have one down the road for Alex Zumwalt. It might be an episode next week. But I really wanted to give praise and give a little bit of criticism to a guy like Brian Sweeney. Brian Sweeney and Zach Bove, the pitching coach and assistant pitching coach, walked into this year with a disaster on their hands. Anybody ever seen Kitchen Nightmares or Bar Rescue? If you haven't before, it's 2 of my favorite shows to watch. You walk into a situation for Gordon Ramsay and Kitchen Nightmares. You walk into a restaurant. You kind of do a stress test. That's one of the first parts of the episode, a stress test where he just comes in and sees how things are done. You evaluate. And then you come in and implement your ways. Some people are abrasive to it. Some people accept it. But it's a part of going through that entire episode. Bar Rescue, same thing. They have a stress test. John Taffer comes in and he sees how things are done. And then you go from there. This is what it felt like to me with Matt Quatrero, Brian Sweeney, Zach Bove, Paul Hoover. They came in, wanted to see how things are done. And then it's about implementing your own ways. And it's not a night and day fix. For anybody out there that thought the Royals pitching staff was going to be night and day difference in 1 year, just pause and look at the roster on opening day. Zach Greinke, 40-year-old Zach Greinke, was the opening day starter. That should have been the tell-off. That should have been point number 1. We have a 40-year-old journeyman as our opening day starter. That's alarming. Okay, next year, you can probably evaluate a little bit better, but I think of the overall message, the goal for this team was to find out who really is a long-term fit. Who can you fix? If Chris Bubic was still pitching, I think we'd all be pretty happy with the way the rotation had shaped out a little bit. Brady Singer's had a strong second half. You have Cole Reagans, and maybe Chris Bubic carried that first 3-start success over the course of a couple months. Maybe he couldn't, maybe he could. We might see, coming back next year and through spring training. Daniel Lynch took a step back. Brad Keller took a severe step back. Jordan Lyles and Zach Greinke I don't really read into because they were never going to be future fits. They're just veterans that are going to do things their own way. Carlos Hernandez and Aroldis Chapman were the biggest success stories for Brian Sweeney and Zach Bove. Those two guys became lights-out relievers with some of the best stuff in baseball. Aroldis Chapman got you Cole Reagans. Now Cole Reagans has some of the best stuff among left-handed starters in the big leagues, not just this year, last couple of years. So for that, I give a B+. The overall message, what you're trying to do. I think I got to give it a B+ because some guys did take a step back, but that could have been them not willing to learn. Brad Keller, I can't really say wasn't willing to learn because he tried to develop new pitches. He just couldn't put it all together. Now, I thought Josh Staumont took a step back. That was problematic. But then we saw Austin Cox and Alec Marsh have their moments. That's important to note here. But when you don't have this much talent, like, don't expect it to be like Tampa Bay where everybody that comes in just becomes a lights-out reliever. You're hoping it gets to that point. But the Royals have to start somewhere. You got to pick and choose which guys really improved. Carlos Hernandez did, and Carlos Hernandez was washed up last year. He was bad last year, and you turn him into something. Now you could flip him in the offseason for even more pitching. Brady Singer took a step back, and that's why I got to think it has to be a B+ as well. It would be an A if Brady Singer was good all season long, because then you're feeling pretty good about the younger guys in the rotation. But I got to give it a B+ there. I think the overall numbers, I'll give it a C+. I would have liked to see even less walks. The walk rate go down a little bit more. The strikeout numbers to go up a little bit more. That's a big part of a rotation. A lot of blown saves at the back end of the bullpen. Mitch Stetter, the bullpen coach. There's a lot of different blame to go around here. It's not just Brian Sweeney. But for the overall numbers, probably a C+. The message, a B+. And the last thing I think I want to go over here is the overall, I guess, direction. You can have your message, you can have your numbers in the direction. Do I feel good about it going forward? I think I'm going to put it, again, about a B or a B+. Because if this team can get more help in that rotation, a true number one, a 200 innings guy, which they have not had since maybe it might have been James Shields, to be honest with you. Man, no, it was Edinson Volquez. Edinson Volquez was the last guy to have over 200 innings. And that was back in either 15 or 16. And I want to say it was 2015. So you're coming up on a decade since your last 200 innings guy. Ian Kennedy was the last guy to throw over 180. You need a true number one. Take some pressure off Singer next year if he's in this rotation. Definitely take pressure off Cole Reagans. You get a true number one and number two. It makes things easier on the pitching staff. It makes things easier on the bullpen, which is what every person, every Royals fan is hoping for. If you can take pressure off your 3 and 4 and 5 in the rotation, guess who else that takes pressure off of? The bullpen. If you're throwing only 5 innings and you're turning it over the bullpen, well, guess what happens in Game 3 of that series? Burned out. Completely fatigued. The Royals have used 700,000 different pitchers in that bullpen this year. You want to dwindle that down a little bit. Look at what the Tigers have done. Look at what the Reds have done. How they built a bullpen. Look what Baltimore did. You don't need to build a bullpen by going out and signing guys to 2-year deals, 3-year deals. Go sign a closer. You don't need that. You need the right scouting, and you need a good rotation. Now, the Tigers this year, I think that's the best example to look at because the Royals might be close to the Tigers in terms of true competitiveness. And the Tigers all season long have been somewhat entertaining despite overall being a bad baseball team. Bottom 5 in run differential, yet still hanging around in the AL Central. You know how they did that? Really good bullpen. The offense isn't great. They've got a couple of good hitters, Riley Green, you got Kerry Carpenter. But then you also have some black holes in the lineup like Javier Baez, Spencer Torkelson. But the Tigers did enough because the rotation, too, was fine. Eduardo Rodriguez was a true number one. The Royals needed number one in that rotation. Then guys for the Tigers like Matt Manning. They didn't have Casey Mize this year. No, Matt Manning, just good enough. Then you had somebody in the offseason like a Michael Lorenzen. He's going to be a free agent this year. The Royals needed number one and number two. You go from there. And then that overall direction for Brian Sweeney, that can go from a B+ to an A. So I'm not really disappointed. You want to put the overall gauge there for all 3 grades, probably a B+. B+, C+, B+. Feels pretty good for me so far in year 1 for Brian Sweeney. The team has improved. The pitching has improved, but it was also bottom barrel last year. They just went slightly up. Got to take a much bigger jump next year in 2024. That is going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. You can always follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And you can find all of our podcasts on the podcasting platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and you can check us out on YouTube. Since I did not have an episode on Tuesday, we are going to have an episode tomorrow night coming out. Probably going to wait till right before that Game 2 in the Seattle series. So I am going to give you all 5 episodes this week, so don't feel like I'm cutting you a little bit short. So be prepared for that. Another edition of Locked On Royals tomorrow evening. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.